Hi, and welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I will talk about introductions in academic paper writing. Not exactly how to write them, but I will encourage you to think about introductions as an especially important part of a paper and highlight some of what I find crucial issues and guidelines. And as always, a small disclaimer. This is my view on things. Others, especially academics from other fields, might have other views. So see this as one perspective and be critical. What do you think is the right way to do an introduction? So you've gotten your reader interested in your compelling title and your short but concise abstract. The reader is now wanting to know more, and the introduction is where she or he decides if the paper is worth the time. This means that the introduction does not only lay out the facts of the paper and give overview of its motivations, methods, key results, and so on, it also needs to appeal to the readership. Besides the reviewers of the academic paper, the audience is not given. Nobody are required to read your paper, and so if the title and abstract were advertisements to lure an audience, the introduction has to both convince and appeal to the reader. And therefore, often writing a good introduction to a paper or any text, for that matter, is both troublesome and time-consuming. As I mentioned in another podcast, many students start writing the introduction as the first part of the writing process, setting down the direction of the paper and laying out exactly what the research paper is trying to achieve. While this might be a good exercise for developing and reflecting on your paper, for many academics, writing the introduction is something that happened in the last phases of the paper writing process. Most academics, however, follow a rather strict protocol for the structure and content of the introductions. As with the whole paper, this makes it easier for the reader to quickly familiarize oneself with the introduction, and so straying from these conventions might be relevant and even justifiable in some cases, but cannot be recommended. A good introduction should generally include: first, create an overall good impression of your work. Be attractive. And this means to weed out bad language, long and weird, hard to understand sentences, and spelling and grammar errors. Then it should be informative, convey what the paper is about so the reader can assess the relevance. What is the reader going to encounter? And then it should create warrant and mandate. It has to identify clearly what gap or niche the paper is contributing to in the existing knowledge. So why is this important and to whom? This is particularly what we talked about in the first podcast on the subject of relevance. Then it should be interesting and engaging so the reader will want to continue reading. So persuade the reader to use time on the paper. Think about how you write it. And remember, this is not a crime novel. Most scholarly traditions will not let the reader hanging with the grand findings and results to the end. Instead, front load, flag up everything from the start. And that also goes for book chapters, reports, notes, white papers, emails, and so on. However, depending on the structure of the paper, if there's an abstract, for instance, you might want to think about if you need to highlight your key findings or key principal findings in the introduction, as they will appear 3 times: abstract, introductions, and in the result. In that case, you might want to leave it out of the introduction. Pat Thompson, who is a professor of education at the University of Nottingham, has written extensively on academic writing and talks about what she thinks a good introduction is. She points to that a good introduction is made up of 4 general moves. So locate, focus, argue, expand, outline. I will now try briefly to go through what Pat Thompson is saying about each of these moves. Locate the paper. This means setting up the context of the paper in, for example, a problem in the field, a difficulty in practice, a debate in the literatures, a problematization of a taken for granted theory or approach, a proposition, a curiosity, or puzzle. This establishes the niche, space, gap, or issue that the paper will address. People sometimes use a quotation, a narrative, or a rhetorical question to begin the locate word in an attention-getting way. Establishing the niche and motivation for your paper is the key move in the introduction, so you need to carefully consider how you do this. So the next two moves, focus and argue expand. These are meant to spell out what the paper is going to do. It's often helpful just to write, this paper will something something, or in this paper I or we will something something. It is important to make this snappy. However, it is generally the case that the focus of the paper needs to be further explained, and this can be done by saying more about the way in which the contribution has been generated. So here, use the expand part of the introduction to maybe explain a particular method, a sample. And expand might also offer definitional work to create some boundaries about what is to be done. It might set out to talk about what other papers haven't, just to reinforce the niche that the paper contributes to, without of course being repetitive of what has already been stated in the locate part outline. So in this move, the various sections of the paper are mapped out. Empirical results are listed and the argument that is going to be made is signaled. This roadmap to the paper is specific and not waffle or a vague promise. So for example, an outline would not say something cryptic like, the paper provides evidence of major themes that emerge during analysis. Rather, it would actually say what these important themes were. Sometimes the roadmap is ordered by numbers. So this could sound like, the paper consists of 4 moves. Firstly, something something, secondly, something something, thirdly, something something, and finally, something something. And the so what is of course anticipated, as in, for example, I argue in conclusion that something something something. Okay, let's finish off with 2 exercises. So first, try to read, analyze and deconstruct other introductions to identify how they are structured. Maybe they have not approached the 4 moves in the same order, but usually an introduction will hold some of the same content. And second, from the 4 moves of locate, focus, expand and outline, try to draft your own introduction. Start with sorting keywords or key sentences under each move. Don't worry at this point about making perfect sentences, syntax, spelling and so on. Try now to create a structure and formulate fuller sentences. And then finally, try aiming for not more than 1 page or approximately 500 words. So this concludes this podcast. Thank you for listening.